Thank you very much, Mr. Paul. I was going to say James, but then you might think that we were really closer than we are. And we are. You know, one of the things that I love about this country, as I keep saying, in fact, in this very room, on Wednesday, when we met to elect our first president, is that the thing that unites us most as Barbadians is the ability to set a common mission and to work towards it irrespective of whatever else may divide us internally. And James was absolutely correct in saying that when he called, I really didn't give him much chance after he said what he said in terms of inviting me to speak. And it was because I really felt as though I wanted an opportunity to be able to engage with you as I am doing with almost every sector across this country now. In the midst of COVID reconstruction, and I deliberately do not say post-COVID reconstruction, because we all know that what we have with us is likely to be here for some time. And that if we were to wait to do that which is necessary, then the casualties would be far more than those who have passed from simply the catching of COVID. But let me start by thanking all of you, and thanking you in particular, James and Mr. Chairman, and the rest of the executive, Henderson and others, because when we came to government, I said that they were effectively, in my view, two stepchildren to post-independence Barbados. And those two stepchildren were the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Agriculture. And that in a very real sense, we as a people, not just as a government, needed to understand that the context within which we are going to have to function in today's world requires more than ever attention to one's health and wellness and attention to food and nutritional security as a matter of urgency. And I said so, conscious that those who, as the Chief Agricultural Officer reminded me in her notes to me, that this country's agricultural sector in the early 1970s and late 1960s was perhaps the last high point with respect to where agriculture positioned itself in respect to the entire economy. In those days, when I was about 5 years old, agriculture was literally providing 13% of the country's overall output. Agriculture was employing, on average, 1 in every 5 Barbadians. And agriculture was responsible for 80% of our domestic exports. Then, we had 6,000 acres planted in food crops, and 70% alone was in yams and sweet potatoes. And as a result of that, we all remember the attempts at agro-processing in those days with yam flakes and other things, long before others recognized the absolute necessity for us to be engaged in agro-processing. With respect to the dairy industry, we had just entered into a relationship with a private sector outsider, Northern Dairies of England and the New Zealand Dairy Board. With respect to onions, we had just started serious onion production in 1968. And by 1972, we were producing over 250 acres of onions. With respect to research, there was all kind of research going under. And the truth is that that research wasn't a 20th century innovation, because you know better than me that Barbados distinguished itself with research with respect to sugarcane from as far back as the 19th century. I start at these points because I've come here not just to talk about what government can do or should do, but I've come to have the same conversation with you that I've started to have sector by sector. Yesterday, I did it again with the garment and fashion industry, because government finds itself at this unique point of having to treat to a range of sectoral interests, all of whom have been hit hard by this COVID pandemic, and all of whom have now to ask themselves, what is our mission? And where do we see ourselves in 5 years from now? And what are the milestones that we will use to determine success as we go forward? James, you used the phrase just now about using the taxpayers' money, because having served in public life, you, like me, are acutely aware that these subsidies and the things that we do are not our own money. And therefore, the use and the partnership of the public sector cannot be for business as usual, but must be for transformation of the sector in which we find ourselves. Yesterday, I spoke very briefly as we launched what, for me, is one of the more humanizing elements of post-independence Barbados, where we realized that we could not continue to treat people as workers in the field in the same way that they were treated for the last 4 centuries. And I thank the BAMC and the Minister and others for helping to make things better in a tangible and clear way for the workers in the agricultural sector in this country who have to work in the fields for others. But I made the point with respect to the sugar industry that for them too it cannot be business as usual. And I've come here this morning to begin to discuss with you and to urge you to go and to reflect, because something has happened in our midst in the last 20 months that has literally turned on its head how we do business and what we expect from business. But it isn't only the last 20 months with respect to COVID. And the interesting thing about COVID is that COVID underscores the need for healthy eating more than anything else that has happened. And hence, the need for not just food security, but food and nutritional security to be uppermost in the minds of the Caribbean people and governments. But if that were all you were facing, you might get through. But you are, as much as COVID gives you an opportunity, climate takes it away from you in the same hand. And the climate crisis means that we will have to be adjusting to doing new things that hitherto we weren't doing before. The Ministry of Agriculture is adamant that it must do the research for heat-resistant crops, because for us to ignore that reality is to ignore the prospects that you will have going forward. Last Sunday, for the first time, the Chief Meteorological Officer sent me a heat graph on the island of what the temperatures were last weekend. And in the north of the island, we were easily hitting 34 degrees, 34.1 degrees, easy so. So that you have opportunities from COVID, But you have challenges from climate. And it's not just the heat, it's the access to water. We already know that Barbados is one of the 15 most water-scarce countries in the world, and the extent to which that has inhibited our capacity is better known by you than me. But it is also the floods that are coming more and more frequently, a phenomenon, and I want to salute and recognize Senator Peter Bunting, who is leader of the opposition business in Jamaica and a former Minister of the Crown in Jamaica, and we welcome you to this meeting. We welcome your new investment in the feed at Roberts through Proven, and we recognize that your company is a strong company with Caribbean interests and Caribbean development, and we thank you for your confidence in Barbados, because ultimately that is what the acquisition has meant. But I mentioned that, Peter, in particular, because the phenomenon of afternoon rain is something I associate with Jamaica and not Barbados. But yet in this year of our Lord, we have seen sharp, short showers on too many afternoons. And the regrettable thing about it is that it can lead to flash flooding in a way that can affect, regrettably, farmers as we go. So we have climate, we have COVID. But we also have the disruption of the logistics chain. And the reality, regrettably, that most Caribbean countries are within 7 to 14 days of the maintenance of food supply, which is an entirely untenable situation in circumstances where shipping has become so complicated, complex, and expensive. And if ever there was a time that we need, therefore, to revisit the fundamentals of what we are doing, or why we are doing it, it is now. So I've come here this morning to challenge you and to recognize that the area is so dynamic. Because 2 years ago, when the Minister of Agriculture brought his colleagues here, on the other side of this building, we issued a challenge that the region readily accepted. How do we reduce our import bill, which at the time was $5 billion US, and I'm told is closer to 6 now, by 25% by 2025? Well, we didn't know that COVID was going to come and upend that, and really and truly, that goal seems almost irrelevant, because we need to be doing 25% and 50% all like now. And therefore, there has to be an urgent revisiting of what we can do. When we add all of these things together, it becomes all the more critical for us to be able to determine what that roadmap is, whose responsibilities are what, and what government will do, but what you must do. And I'm asking you, what is your mission? Because if your mission is simply to be able to get by, then you're going to go with the least opposition and the easiest way to success. But it might not be the most sustainable way to success. If your mission, however, is to hold us and the national objectives that we have for food and nutritional security, and that you want to walk with us hand in hand, then we need to sit down and talk now about how we do things differently. We have a responsibility as government to do certain things, but you have a responsibility as well to better align yourselves. The notion of gluts, when we have access to information technology that can facilitate greater cooperation and planning, ought not to be part of our landscape today. But I am told that the persons who are best capable of resolving that problem is not government. It is you, the farmers. And it is the extent to which you are prepared to cooperate and the extent to which you are prepared to share information that you may view as precious to you. But the truth is that when we really study ourselves, there is nothing to be gained by that individualistic approach to production and to planning in the agricultural sector, particularly if our mission is food and nutrition security for all. Similarly, we know that there are challenges with respect to water that we've inherited. And there's a class of person that pays next kin to nothing under the limited facilities offered by the BAMC. And then there's a class of person that pays the equivalent of commercial rates, which is unheard of and impossible to sustain. And I'm happy to report to you that we have a working group led by Dr. Clyde Maskell, who will be concluding the consultations necessary for us to once and for all settle a single price for water for agriculture in this country to the benefit of everybody. You cannot have a sustainable agricultural industry without affordable, reliable access to water. And to that extent, therefore, I applaud the Minister and the Chief Agricultural Officer and the Ministry for engaging with Dr. Maskell and the Barbados Water Authority to see what can be a national solution to this very unfortunate set of circumstances which we have inherited, and which, James, you know, has been going on for how long? Decades. But at the same time, we have also to recognize that those who use the commodity have equally to be fair to the government and to pay for the commodity if they use it. And to that extent, therefore, I believe that the Ministry of Agriculture is also going to be utilizing technology in order to be able to ensure that there can be a prepaid capacity that meets the cash flow of farmers that will make life good for you and good for those who are selling the water. At the same time, we have a responsibility to make sure that the soils which we have are not continuing to degrade, largely because of a failure to attend to their health. Under the last government, the process started with the government of Morocco, and we are continuing that process because the health of our soils is absolutely critical to the yield which you will get, and you know that better than I do. And our failure to be able to properly capitalize the entities that some of you rely on and the government plantations and farms rely on with equipment and with other technology that is absolutely available and there for us to use, is necessary if we are going to see increased yield and if you are going to be able to meet a mission to help us with food and nutritional security as we go forward. We accept that a country that has a history as we do, or like others in the Caribbean, where the relationship to the farm is to the plantation and to the memories of a time that really do not evoke good emotions, that we have to purge ourselves of that as an inhibitor, not as a memory, but as an inhibitor to what we can do. And to recognize that the plantation model for agriculture, as traditionally structured in this part of the world, cannot drive agriculture further. And that what is needed is an appreciation that in countries where the labor cost is as high as ours, there has to be a commitment to the appropriate use of technology in order to give you the competitiveness that is necessary for you to be able to survive in this sector. It is against that backdrop that the ministry has asked, and I am prepared as Minister of Finance to support. In fact, we've told them to come already, with respect to new items of technology that are not traditionally part of the agricultural landscape in this country. And we refer in particular to matters pertaining to drones, to ensure that not only can we identify pests and diseases in our plants, we would be able to deal with predial larceny more effectively in the enforcement, the surveillance necessary in order to make the case, and the evidence as well that will cause the case to stick in court. Assessment of when disaster takes place on a rapid basis so that we're in a position to make policy decisions quickly as to who needs help, when, where, how. In the application of pesticides, access to technology is absolutely critical to being able to move this sector to the next level. The use of the Internet of Things, whether it is sensors to give real-time data on crops and livestock health, unless we are doing these things in our sector going forward, you are going to find that you are going up against a challenge that is going to become difficult for you to overcome. The use of GIS mapping to determine whether crops are at the optimal ripeness in the fields. The use of robotics and unmanned vehicles to plow and to weed and to apply pesticides and to harvest crops. The need for an innovation lab with 3D agricultural printing. We already have the Samuel Jackman Prescott Polytechnic with 3D printers that the Ministry of Agriculture can cooperate with, as well as the various agricultural sectoral organizations. What I'm trying to say to you, my dear friends, is that without the infusion of technology in agriculture at this point in time, on an island that has limited population, in circumstances where our labor costs are already high, we are shooting ourselves in the foot. And that is why I've come here this morning, as I said, to ask you, where do you see yourselves in 5 years' time, and what is your mission? Because if you are in this for the long haul, then the investments which have to be made in agriculture, in technology, in us being able to develop the catchment areas which the government has done. We've done it at River, and I look forward. In fact, I'm already being told that the farmers at River are smiling more than they've ever smiled in a very long time. Spring Hall, Haggots, and Lears, and I am smiling because for the period of time that I have been the Member of Parliament in St. Michael Northeast, I have maintained that I represent a constituency that is a microcosm of this country, and that if it is a microcosm of this country, then it must have a strong agricultural platform. And that is why the Lears Land Lease Project now, with over 100 acres and opportunities for over 166 small farmers, means so much to me. Because particularly those persons who live in the urban corridor, Robert, like you and others, St. Michael, Christchurch, St. James, the southern part of St. Thomas, the western part of St. George, that they must be able to have access in the same way that we have concentrated areas of farming at Spring Hall, at River, the Pine Basin, which needs assistance as we speak. These things will create the opportunities. But it is the use of technology that is going to help us improve the yields, especially against the backdrop of the challenges that we face, which I said at the very beginning. Similarly, the construction and financing and construction of greenhouses and opportunities for rent to own. The government understands that most of the players in this sector are undercapitalized, and it is against that backdrop, therefore, that the Agricultural Development Fund in their not only has to be more effectively utilized, but will have to be replenished as required in order to ensure that those of you who have put your heart and soul in farming and have been struggling can now put yourself at the center of a national plan for food and nutritional security with access to the technology, the recapitalization, and the equipment necessary for you to be able to do your part of the deal. We accept that there has to be continuous training, and that is why the National Transformation Initiative has been set up, along with the TVET Council and the Barbados Vocational Training Board and the Polytechnic, in order to be able to ensure that persons can be appropriately trained. And I've also asked the Ministry of Agriculture for people like myself and others who are not full-time farmers, but who have an interest in growing something, to be able to put out YouTube videos that can literally help the average person not just be curious, but perfect the art of being able to grow something or to raise something. And why? Because too often in the last few decades, we have seen parish by parish by parish the reduction of persons willing to keep stock and to use the rearing of stock as one of the key principles in raising children in this country. It's not child labor, but it is an exposure to learning to take responsibility for something living. And that whatever else you have to do when the day comes, you have to make sure that that animal, that livestock, that pet, whatever, is eaten, is being taken care of, does not need assistance of a medical or veterinary nature rather, and is perhaps one of the best ways in instilling responsibility in our children that we have regrettably not maintained a habit of passing on from generation to generation. I go further. Thank you. You can clap for that, as Matt would say, because we need it to happen. Apart from the training, apart from the technology, apart from the access to finance, apart from what we will do with the soils, apart from what we will do with the water, government accepts its responsibility also in being able to build a modern pack house and storage facility to store the provisions, but more importantly as well, for us to have a storage facility that allows us to maintain at least 3 months of food supply on critical ground provisions and critical vegetables wherever possible, because we do not know when those ships will stop coming in the next few years. Everything that we have seen about the last 2 years, regrettably, reminds us too much of the world a century ago. And the world a century ago went through a world war as well that saw a complete disruption in the supply of food, to the point that where those who lived in those days, when they talk to you, will tell you about sweet potato rice and sweet potato this and sweet potato that, or that you would have to find a way to eat breadfruit in every possible way. You stretch it out, you pickle it, you mash it, you roast it. Every possible way. Because when all is said and done, our first responsibility as a society is to keep ourselves safe and to feed ourselves and to keep ourselves sheltered. And I've come here this morning, therefore, in this mood, to say to you that we will continue to play our part. But I need to know from you if you are prepared to modernize the practice of agriculture in this country to meet the needs of the challenges and the opportunities. The opportunities that COVID has given you to remind everybody in this country that you need to eat healthy. And that this notion of pie every day will cause you to die. I'm serious. Dead serious. And that this notion of flour at 11 o'clock in the morning with a bread van passing around ministries, and I don't want to stop those people from making a living. I want them people to sell fruit instead, or some vegetables from you, or fresh juice. But that is what is killing us. And you, of all people, have the ability to help turn it around for this country. When I spoke in this room and said, why now? People ask, why are you in the middle of COVID electing a president? Because it is important that this country has the ability to believe in itself and to know that we have some challenges that we have to meet together. Together. Because the crisis that is climate is going to challenge you in every possible way. And that is why, even with the maintenance of the use of technology and open field agriculture, we are going to have to find ways as well of making the greenhouse farming more sustainable given our exposure to the other climatic events that we have as well. I hope that we will be able to review the sectoral performance of each aspect of the industry, the pig farmers, the sheep. Many of you know that I have chosen as a pet project for me as Prime Minister the development of Bajan black-belly sheep. I believe that it has the capacity not only to provide the living, to provide the sustenance and raising of our children, as you just heard me say. I believe it is the perfect livestock for urban Barbados because you don't get the smells that the other things give you, regrettably. They give you those other smells. But it teaches and anchors our kids, but above all else, it provides an appropriate marketing opportunity. I thank the New Zealand government for working with the government of Barbados over the years in being able to do more research and to refine the opportunities, and AICA as well. But there is no reason why we should not be producing better cheese instead of feta cheese. And that's not my idea. That's Ms. Harvey from AICA. But I don't want it just to be a statement made by her in a vacuum. We need it to be real. And we need to be exporting better cheese to Jamaica, Peter. You understand? Or to recognize the fact that Barbadian black-belly sheep have a health profile that is better than New Zealand sheep when it comes, therefore, to less fat and being more effective and better for you. But who knows that other than us on a Saturday over pudding and sauce and a drink? It cannot be. And I've come perhaps more than anything else this morning to say that it cannot be business as usual with farming as a hobby for some and merely something to tick over the bills for others. If we are going to be serious as a nation, then we have to reposition the agricultural sector as a matter of urgency. And reposition it is not a governmental activity. It is an activity of partnership where you produce, can expand how much you produce, can be more profitable at what you produce. But I accept that the government has its role to play in helping to reposition you and helping to pick the few winners that we need to pick in order for us to go forward. I hope, therefore, that those sectors, and I know the particular challenges in the dairy sector, and I hope we can have a separate meeting on that, but I hope that we will realize that success is a habit, and we therefore must choose those things which we can do and do well now. I started by talking to you about coordinated production to avoid gluts and using the technology there too. I hope, Minister, that this is something that you can produce and preside over. But I also want to remind you that it is absolutely critical for us to treat the issues of quality Because what must not happen are the other sectors in this economy telling us that they have to continue to import because the quality which they're receiving is not up to scratch. I end on this point. When I was a student in London, I would go into Selfridges and take pride and walk. Sometimes I didn't have the money to afford to buy it. But I'd go and I'd see sweet potatoes. And the next bin then was Bajan sweet potatoes. They were ahead of the game with us with respect to branding. I referred to better cheese just now. I referred to Bajan black belly, which may well be called triple B lamb. I have an uncle Ilombe, who used to be a sheep farmer and who believes and who came up with that name. You can call it whatever you want. But what is needed is the branding in order for us to justify the increased value added that is necessary. Because Barbados, whether we like it or not, is less than 300,000 people and 430 square kilometers. And we can't do everything, but we must do a few things well, and we must anchor that with the national objective of being able to feed our people and feed them well, not in a way that will cost the country more money through increased healthcare spending. I look forward to seeing approaches and applications for the use of the Agricultural Development Fund by you to recapitalize and to retool your sector if your mission is similar to the one that I've outlined this morning. And if it is not, then you must come and say, because we cannot wish or direct for you, because whether we like it or not, governments do not trade in that way. Governments do not produce in that way. It is regrettable that we've had to stand in the breach, particularly with the sugar industry, but I've said to the Minister that the time has now come for that public-private partnership, and the opportunity is afforded us by reason of the renewable energy sector that can allow the sugar factory to be a 12-month power factory, power generator, with an additional source of revenue that hitherto has not been available to the sugar industry. And therefore the reality of producing in excess of the cost of the revenue received has continued to cost the taxpayers of this country billions of dollars in the last 50 years. That road has come to an end. And we need, therefore, to use the policy tools, whether it is renewable energy or whatever other tools we have in terms of creativity for a sugar cane industry as opposed to simply a sugar industry, in order to be able to create the multiple forms of revenue such that this does not continue to the perpetual drain on the consolidated fund that it has been in the last 45 years or so. I want us to be able to use that money to recapitalize the agricultural sector and to put you on the cutting edge such that it will not be reflected as a hobby for some or as a bare means of survival for others. And I look forward, therefore, in partnering with your society and all of the other agricultural associations that exist for us to do that which we set out to do at the beginning of this term, but which was interrupted by COVID. But as Colonel Bostic says all the time, there shall be no surrender and there shall be no retreat. And that the goal of us being capable of providing for ourselves through food and nutritional security must remain that mission. And if you're on board, we will assist you in helping us to get to that destination safely. Thank you very much.